It's Saturday, so we're welcoming Dr. Nick back because that's what we do on Saturdays. Apparently, Dr. Nick has been here every month so far this year, which is wonderful that we've been able to invite him so often and have him here sharing his wisdom with us so far. Dr. Nick met the Dharma in 1972, has been a student of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa since then, and has worked for FPMT also since then, creating incredible organizations like Wisdom Publications and Tushita in New Delhi and Kurukula and Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, which is a wonderful resource for anyone who wants to connect with the teachings. And he's been teaching also, traveling and teaching for decades. So it's, again, wonderful to have Dr. Nick with us here for today's workshop. And when you're ready, if you'll lead us in Refuge and Bodhicitta, then the center will offer a mandala.
Okay. I'm very insecure. I don't have my mala, so I'm going to get it. So just give me half a sec. Sorry. Sangye Jordan Sogi Chonam Chanchu Baruda Nigap Suchi Dagi Jojingi Bezonam Ki Rola Benje Sangye Rupa Sho Sangye Jordan Sogi Chonam Chanchu Baruda Nigap Suchi Dagi Jojingi Bezonam Ki Rola Benje Sangye Rupa Sho Sangye Chodang Zogi Chonam La Changchu Baruda Nikap Suchi Dagi Chojinge Bezonam Ki Rola Benche Sangye Dupa Sho. So that's, taking refuge, and taking refuge distinguishes us from followers of non-Buddhist paths, and generating bodhicitta distinguishes us from followers of the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle that leads to individual liberation but not to enlightenment. So by generating bodhicitta, we try to establish ourselves as followers of Mahayana with the goal of attaining enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That's what we just did. Also, it says there, well, it doesn't say there now, but it said before, by listening to teachings, what did it say? By listening, by the merits I create, through listening to the Dharma, Dagi Chernyen. Chernyen means listening to Dharma. So I say Dagi Churjin, which is by the merits I create through giving the Dharma. So the teacher should say Churjin, and the people listening say Chernyen. So I don't know what I'm going to give you, but I hope it's the Dharma. Okay, thanks.
This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Yedam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryataya.
Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, so let's just start with a couple of minutes of quiet meditation on the breath. So think, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. in order to do that, I need to reach enlightenment myself, and that depends upon completing the path to enlightenment. By completing the path to enlightenment, I'll become a Buddha, I'll attain Buddhahood, and be able to benefit all sentient beings in the highest possible way. Therefore, to understand a little more about what that means, becoming a Buddha, I'm going to participate in this workshop on what is a Buddha and how do I become one. So I'm participating in this in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So, we generated bodhicitta before with the prayer, but now we just do it again, thinking a little more about the meaning. So Lama Yeshe used to say, when we recite these prayers, we recite them 3 times with the hope that maybe by the 3rd time we actually understand what we're saying. That was Lama's explanation for why we do these prayers 3 times. For some people like me, I'd probably say it 20 times, I still wouldn't get it. But luckily, not everybody's like me. So sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, you're all we're already enlightened. You're already a Buddha. You just don't know it." So that seems a little silly, since one of the qualities of Buddha is to know everything. So you think if you're enlightened, you know that you're enlightened. And I can't imagine what the experience of being enlightened is. And no, can't imagine it. And I think people say that because we all sentient beings, humans, animals, insects, all sentient beings have the potential to become enlightened. And sometimes it's said, our minds have Buddha nature. I think I mentioned before, Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to say that we don't have Buddha nature, only a Buddha has Buddha nature, only a Buddha is of the nature of a Buddha. So what people are really saying, more correctly, what people should be saying is that all sentient beings have the potential to become Buddha because, as we talked last time, that our minds have clear light nature. And at the moment, we don't experience our clear light nature. We can't access our clear light nature voluntarily because it's covered in layers and layers and layers of delusion, gross delusion and subtle obscuration. But those layers of obscuration that cover or obscure our mind's clear light nature are not inextricably mixed with it, with the clear light nature. They can be removed. So last time we talked about, I read you what Lama Zopa Rinpoche said about how is it possible to become enlightened. And it's possible because the obscurations, both gross and subtle, can be removed by an appropriate method. And, and the appropriate method is practice of Dharma. And the example that the lamas often give is that our mind is like a mirror, that can reflect objects. Our mind, the two we talked in more detail last time. The mind is formless, like empty space, but it's different from empty space in that it has this other quality of knowing or awareness. It can reflect objects, and that's why the simple definition of a mind is it's clear and knowing. It's clear, it's formless, and knowing it has the ability to perceive objects. So a mirror can't reflect if it's covered in filth, but if we remove the filth with soap and water or Windex or whatever, then we can reveal the pure, clear mirror beneath. So by practicing Dharma, we remove the thick, what Lama used to call heavy blankets of ignorance. So we think of our, poor little pure light, clear light nature of mind that's covered with all these thick, heavy, wet blankets of delusion, ignorance, attachment, aversion, pride, doubt, and all these things. And we went through the delusions last time in little detail. So all these things can be removed. They all have antidotes. So practice of Dharma entails removing these gross and subtle obscurations that cover our clear light nature of mind. And by doing that, we become a Buddha. We become enlightened. So what is a Buddha? I wanted to, actually, I first found out what a Buddha was when we did at my first Kopan course. And, we had a textbook that we were given when we signed up for the course. Well, when I signed up for the third course in 1972, so the Lamas had given, the Rinpoche basically had given the first Lamrim course at Kopan in the spring of 1971. So this time last year was the 50th anniversary of that first course. And actually there was planned to have a 50th reunion of people who'd been not just to the first course, but to all those early courses in the 70s, basically. But the pandemic put paid to those plans. So now they're talking about having some of the people who are at the fifth course, which I mean, they were all special in their way, but the fifth course which was in the fall of 73. It was the first one that had like a couple of hundred people. The fourth course, there are about 120 people. Third course, there are about 50, just over 50. And the first and second courses, there are about 20 people. So now there's a plan to maybe next year have a 50th anniversary of the fifth course. And a lot of people who were there expressed some interest in that. We'll see. Kopan is still basically closed in terms of having courses anyway. So most of Rinpoche's teachings in those early courses were on what's commonly called the lower scope, which Rinpoche prefers to call the path of the lower capable being, or the, if you edit that a little bit into more standard English, you might say the path of the practitioner of least capability. So we know that the path is divided into these. When you get to the actually following the path, there are these three levels of paths of the practitioners of least, intermediate, and greatest capability, with the aims of those paths being the lower path. The aim is just to avoid rebirth in the lower realms, to be reborn in the upper realms. And the intermediate path, the path of the practitioner of intermediate capability or middling capability, is to attain individual liberation. So that's the goal of the lesser vehicle of the Hinayana. And the goal of the practitioner of greatest capability is the Mahayana path. The goal is to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So most of Rinpoche's teachings were on the path of the practitioner of least capability. That was as much as we could get through in a month when Rinpoche was teaching mostly to beginners. But they were Mahayana teachings because at the beginning of the first discourse of the day, which was usually around 9 a.m., Rinpoche would quote a verse from Shantideva, mainly the first chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara, the benefits of bodhicitta, or from Kunu Lama Rinpoche's verses in praise of bodhicitta. He would quote a verse praising bodhicitta and then give a brief or sometimes intermediate or even a long explanation, a commentary on that verse. And that would be our bodhicitta motivation for the day's activities, for the teachings, for the meditations, for the discussion groups, and for the ordinary activities, eating, talking, whatever we were doing. So in that way, Rinpoche kind of imbued his teachings with bodhicitta, even though the main topic was on the path of the practitioner of least capability. So we'll look at that later. But part of that path is refuge, and it's in refuge that we find the clearest explanation in Lamrim about what is a Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha. So I want to look at that. This edition of Rinpoche's textbook, The Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun, I think this was the third or the fourth. I think this one, the first edition was what we were given at the third course, and that was based on notes that had been put together by the students at the second course. After that course, I decided to stay at Kopan. Most people left, and I told Rinpoche that it was kind of, this book that we were given was kind of life-changing book, but I thought it could do with a little editorial work. And Rinpoche said, well, it had just been put together by the students, but he had some ideas of how it could be improved. And if I liked, I could work with him on it. So I liked. And we spent like 6 weeks going through the whole thing from beginning to end, rewriting it. And what we came up with wasn't all that different from the students' notes, actually. But, Rinpoche tidied it up. And then over the subsequent few years, in between Kopan courses and in 72 and 73 and 74, there were 2 courses a year in the spring and the fall. And then after that, the Lamas started making longer. They went to the West in 74 for the first time. A fairly quick trip to United States and fairly quick trip to Australia and New Zealand. After that, they started making longer trips and going to more countries and being away. So after that, there was only time to do 1 Copan course a year, what's now called the November course. And so that went every November until a couple of years ago. And I don't know if there's going to be a November course this year. I think people are hoping there might be. Or they might do some kind of hybrid course. I don't know. Remains to be seen. So if that happened, I think that would be like the 53rd course, something like that. So somehow this was more or less the final edition of the course. That was the 74 course, and we did quite a bit of editorial work in 75, but that never really made it into a revised edition. And so, I always carried this around, and I made notes in the margins and everywhere, I don't know if you can tell. But it's such a mess. I wanted to use this, but it's such a mess. I really should organize all my notes and little points that Rinpoche made and clarifications and so forth. So unfortunately, I can't use that, Rinpoche's exact teaching, but Rinpoche's teachings in those early Copan courses were based on Pabonga Rinpoche's liberation. So maybe you all have this book. It's kind of, for the FPMT, it's kind of the quintessential Lamrim teaching. And it's a teaching that a lot of the Lamas base their teachings on. The Lamrim teaching, Geshe Dage at the Tibetan Library, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and other Gelug Lamas would base their teachings on Pabonga Rinpoche's liberation in the palm of your hand. And that, of course, was based on Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo. This is volume 1. So this, has the detailed teaching on refuge, and the outline of that is essentially what Pabonga Rinpoche followed when he gave the teachings that became liberation in the palm of your hand. I think Pabonga Rinpoche gave these teachings in 1921, I think, and then they were edited by His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, who was one of Pabonga Rinpoche's closest disciples. He edited that book over the next 37 years, and it was finally published in Tibetan in 1958. And then we published it at Wisdom in the English translation by Michael Richards. We translated that we published that in 1991. And then there's a new edition, this blue one, which was revised significantly from the first to 91 edition. This was published in 2006, I think. Yeah. So I'm going to refer to that when we're talking about what is a Buddha. So as I mentioned, these teachings in terms of the Lamrim, the teaching on refuge comes in the path of the practitioner of least capability, the first third of the path. And there are essentially two reasons for taking refuge, which are the two causes for taking refuge: fear of the suffering of cyclic existence, which are outlined in the earlier teachings. Last time, I don't know if some of you were here, 2 weeks ago, was it? Where we talked about perfect human rebirth. And I'd actually hoped to do more, but kind of ran out of time. But we did some meditation on the 8 freedoms, and I think I mentioned the 10 richnesses. So that teaching is to make it clear to us how perfect this human life that we've received is from the standpoint of being able to practice Dharma. And not just practice Dharma, but practice Dharma in all its aspects. We can practice the Hinayana teachings that lead to liberation. They sort of come in the first 2 levels of the path. We can practice the Mahayana teachings, which come in the third part of the path. And the Mahayana teachings, as you know, are divided into Sutra and Tantra. So Sutra is kind of the gradual. Sutra teachings explain the gradual way to attain enlightenment. And that's said to take 3 countless great eons, which is just an inconceivably long period of time. Even a regular eon is an inconceivably long period of time. Someone once asked the Buddha, how long is an eon? And the Buddha said, well, imagine you've got this block, this cube of granite, solid, no cracks or crevices, solid granite, 7 miles, in no miles, but 7 miles wide, 7 miles deep, and 7 miles long, cube of granite. And then once every 100 years, someone comes out with a delicate piece of silk, like chiffon, chiffon. It's kind of diaphanous, you can see through it. But it comes with the finest chiffon from Varanasi. I guess that's where they made the best silk. And lightly strokes that block of granite and then goes away. Then 100 years later, someone else, I guess that person's dead by then, someone else comes out with a delicate piece of chiffon from Varanasi and lightly strokes the piece of granite again and goes away. And then 100 years later, so he said, that block of granite will be worn away by those people coming out with the chiffon every 100 years before 1 eon has passed. Another explanation that I believe the Buddha gave at a different time was you have a basket that big, 7 miles high, 7 miles deep, 7 miles long, and it's filled with sesame seeds. Sesame seeds are really, really small little seeds, And then every 100 years, someone comes and removes 1 sesame seed. So he said that huge basket would be empty of sesame seeds by removing 1 every 100 years before an eon has passed. So 2 examples like that. So by following the sutra path, we can become a Buddha, but it takes 3 countless great eons. So an ordinary eon is like that, the 7 miles thing, So a great eon is much longer than that. I don't know how much longer. Vastly longer than that, a great eon. And then a countless great eon is inconceivably greater than the previous inconceivability. And there are 3 countless great eons. So I think it takes one countless eon, one countless great eon, to go from when you first enter, there are 10 bodhisattva levels. So when you enter, it takes one countless great eon by following the sutra path to complete the first bodhisattva level. And then it takes another countless great eon to complete the next 7, to get to the end of the 7th. So the next 6, to go through 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. And then, that's when you become an Arya Bodhisattva. That's when you fully realized emptiness. And then it takes another countless great eon to traverse the 8th, the pure levels, so-called, the 8th, 9th, and 10th bodhisattva levels, and finally attain enlightenment. So 3 countless great eons, that's a really long period of time. So that's by following the sutra path of the Mahayana. So for bodhisattvas who have unbearable great compassion, can't bear to wait that long, that's the path that Shakyamuni Buddha followed, by the way. So we have all these 550 or whatever it is, birth Jataka tales, the stories of the Buddha's previous lives, where he was a bodhisattva monkey, or he was a bodhisattva this, or he was a king, or he was a prince, or whatever, all these different lives of the Buddha as a bodhisattva. And that's what you do over 3 countless great eons. You gradually complete the 6 perfections of generosity, morality, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom, doing these different bodhisattva activities, life after life after life, benefiting sentient beings as a bodhisattva on the path, by taking that long time to gradually complete the 6 perfections and become enlightened. So for some bodhisattvas who have unbearable great compassion, can't stand the thought of taking that long before they can really benefit sentient beings as a Buddha. For those bodhisattvas who have that compassion, who have greater intelligence than perhaps others, then the Buddha showed the tantric path to enlightenment, the Vajrayana vehicle, the tantric vehicle of the Mahayana, through which we can, the highly fortunate and those who are actually already advanced from previous lives practice, like Milarepa or Yahweh Ensapa, or some of these great lineage lamas. I think Jan Willis's book called Enlightened Beings tells the story of of 6, I think, 6 of the Gelug lineage lamas who attained enlightenment in a lifetime. So those highly advanced practitioners can, through the practice of Tantra, can reach enlightenment in a single lifetime. Or there are practices you can do to reach enlightenment through tantric practice in 7 lifetimes, and then I think it said if you keep the tantric vows perfectly for 16 lifetimes without doing many other practices, you can reach enlightenment. But if we understand how difficult it is to keep the tantric precept purely, remember Atisha said he never breaks his monk's vows, his pratimoksha vows, and he very rarely broke any bodhisattva vows, but he would break his tantric vows like rain falling, he said. So if a teacher had trouble keeping tantric vows, how much trouble are we going to have? So, but if you keep them purely, you can reach enlightenment in 16 lifetimes. Anyway, something like that. What I'm saying needs to be checked. But it's much faster than 3 countless great eons, for sure. Just in a relatively small number of lifetimes. So to go from one lifetime practicing Tantra into the next life, like going through, grades in school or through, years in university or whatever, going from, you study, you pass the exams, you go on the next year, like that. To do that for 16 continuous lifetimes, you need to be pretty advanced practitioner anyway. So that sort of practice is probably, to practice at that level is probably beyond us. Putting it mildly. So, but nevertheless, we should if we have the opportunity to take an initiation from a qualified Vajra master and to take the tantric vows, even though we're going to break them like, monsoon rain falling. And we should, try to practice the sadhanas, the methods of accomplishment, and recite the mantras and, receive tantric commentaries. Whatever we can do to leave imprints on our mind, to develop a connection with the Vajrayana, because ultimately that will reach enlightenment more quickly through our, beginners, kind of pathetic tantric practice in this lifetime. But if we try sincerely and we do all the purification practices that stop our, transgression of the tantric vows from festering, and if we do retreats from time to time, Vajrasattva retreat or Damsik Dorji, Samaya Vajra retreat, which is specifically to purify broken tantric vows, then we can make a lot of progress in this life. And hopefully next life, again, meet the tantric teachings. Now, we talked last time about dark and light periods. You remember we talked about the evolution of the universe. I think we looked at this book of Venerable Gyatso's book on. I said you should invite him to give some talks. He's in Australia, but he might have to get up at 4 a.m, but I'm sure he'd do it for you guys. We talked about this evolution of the universe. My bookmark's still here. Buddhist cosmology, and we talked about these, the greater and lesser eons. Remember, and so this is the eon, fortunate eons, when a thousand Buddhas will appear. So of the 1,000 Buddhas of this so-called fortunate eon, in which there are 20 lesser eons, Guru Shakyamuni Buddha is the 4th of the 1,000 Buddhas, and Maitreya Buddha he's going to be the 5th. He's going to appear when the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha have completely disappeared and there's terrible suffering and chaos on the earth, and but gradually that bad karma finishes, and then the lives of sentient beings increase up to the sort of pure human bodies, the light bodies. But then then when the lifespan again, because the seed of delusion is still there, as that starts to grow, the lifespan decreases again when it gets down to about 100 years or something like that. Then again, another Buddha will appear. So it's only on the downward degenerating time the Buddha appears. So of the 1,000 Buddhas, only the first, the fourth, Shakyamuni Buddha, and the last, I think the last, will give tantric teachings. So it's not because all these other Buddhas don't know about the tantric teachings, it's because the sentient beings, the human beings at that time, don't have the karma to receive them. So we want to make sure that we plant plenty of imprints of Vajrayana in our consciousness, so that when we're reborn, we may be born in another world system where there's a Buddha teaching Tantra. And when there are, Vajra masters around. So there are two causes of taking refuge. So the teachings in the Lam Rim, I hope maybe look at that later this afternoon, but the perfect human rebirth teaching makes us aware of this precious opportunity that we have with the 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses, every opportunity to practice Dharma, including especially, and one of the 10 richnesses, well, not one of the 10 richnesses, but I'd say maybe the 11th richness that we have is that we're born in a time when the Vajrayana teachings exist. So the other teachings talk about the general teachings of Buddha when we're talking about the perfect human rebirth, but so we really have an 11th richness, that we're born at a time when the Vajrayana teachings exist. So this is really the time to prioritize practice of Dharma over everything else in our lives. To have that kind of perspective. And so in the sequence of the Lam Rim, we'll see that the perfect human rebirth that has all these opportunities, it's very difficult to receive. Unfortunately, doesn't last a long time. It lasts actually a very short time. And, we're going to die. So the next teaching, after the teaching on the perfect human rebirth, is teaching on the 3 lower realms. So that, which explains in detail the suffering of the hell realms, the hungry ghost, and the animal realms. So the point of that is to help us understand that if we die soon, if we die without having practiced Dharma much, if we waste a lot of time, if we haven't done a lot of purifications, if we die soon, and who's to say we won't, we're going to be reborn according to the force of karma. And the vast majority of the karma that we've accumulated since beginningless time in our mind is negative karma. the cause for rebirth in the lower realms. And the amount of positive karma we've created is very tiny. The reason being, it just, since beginning of this time, we've been habituated to acting under the influence of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. So nearly every action we do creates negative karma. We don't have to motivate to act out of attachment. We don't have to motivate to get angry. We don't have to motivate to kind of be ignorant. That state of mind is kind of our permanent residence, as are the lower realms. And, we're just visitors here in the upper realms. And our visa's about to run out. So if we were to die soon with this huge preponderance of negative karma and a tiny little bit of positive karma, for sure we're going to be reborn in the lower realms. So by studying the teachings of what a terrible result that would be, we have to, what I said was, after the teachings on the perfect human rebirth, the next teaching is the teaching on impermanence and death. So that, to make it clear that this perfect human rebirth that only lasts for a short time, is going to finish with death. And, death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain. So that if we are to die soon with this unpurified negative karma, then we're born in the lower realms. So then we see that we've got this precious opportunity. It's going to finish soon. And the result of it finishing soon is we're going to be reborn in the lower realms, where we can't practice Dharma at all. So seeing the kind of terrifying situation that we're in through studying these teachings and meditating on them, and having a positive fear, a healthy fear of being reborn in the lower realms and not being able to continue our Dharma practice, we look around for a solution to this situation. And the solution is the next teaching in the Lamrim, which is on refuge. So one cause of our taking refuge is this fear of the suffering of not just the lower realms, but really all of samsara, but particularly the lower realms. The other cause for taking refuge is full confidence in the object of refuge to save us from that terrible situation. So the teachings in refuge, in the refuge part of the Lamrim, explain why why our objects of refuge are perfect objects of refuge. And that is the Buddha, the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, and the Sangha. So the first teaching in refuge explains the qualities of the Buddha. So what is a Buddha? This is what a Buddha is. So in the teaching on refuge, it's it comes in this section called which teaching the means for happiness in your next rebirth. So in the Lamrim outline, so we had this last time, that the teaching on perfect human rebirth is to stimulate us to want to extract the essence from this perfect human rebirth. And then the next teaching is how to extract the essence from our perfect human rebirth. So then how to extract the essence from our perfect human rebirth? Then we have these three levels, these three so-called scopes, or these three paths of practitioners of least, intermediate, and greatest capability. So in the training of our path in the what's called the lower scope, there are two sections. There's developing the yearning for a good rebirth, and then teaching the means for happiness in your next rebirth. So, so the teaching of the means of happiness, the first part is taking refuge. I'm not going to do all this, but I'll just mention it. The teaching on refuge, which is subtitled "The Holy Gateway for Entering the Teachings." So when we take refuge based on the understanding of the previous teachings, that's when we become a Buddhist. We recognize the sufferings of samsara, and we recognize the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the solution to those sufferings. So when we recognize that and we take refuge, and usually we do that in a refuge ceremony, that's when we become a Buddhist. So in practical terms, that's when we become a Buddhist. Philosophically, we become a Buddhist when we accept the four marks or the four seals of Buddhism, that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all conditioned phenomena are suffering in nature, all phenomena are selfless, or without inherent existence, and nirvana is true peace. So these are the sort of four philosophical hallmarks of Buddhism. If we accept those as being true, then philosophically that's we have the mind of a Buddhist. So taking refuge is the gateway for entering the teachings. And it has 5 sections. The first is the causes on which our refuge depends. So that's fear of sufferings of samsara and confidence in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The second is what objects to take refuge in. The third is the criterion for having taken refuge properly. Then there's the benefits of taking refuge, and the advice, or the precepts of taking refuge, what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed not to do when we've taken refuge. So here we're going to look at the causes. So we mentioned the causes. So then the actual second one, the actual identification of the objects in which we take refuge. So that talks about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So here today we're talking about the Buddha. So the best description of what a Buddha is given here in the refuge teachings of the Lamrim. So there's a quote from a text called 150 Verses of Praise, which says, "Take refuge in whoever does not have and never will have any shortcomings, and in whom resides every aspect of all good qualities. If one with such a mind exists, take refuge in," it says him, you can say them, "take refuge in them, praise them and venerate them. It is right to abide by their teachings." So that's really describing the Buddha. In other words, when we think of how to distinguish between what should be a refuge and what should not. We want to take refuge in the Buddha, the teacher of Buddhism, in his teachings, and in those who abide by his teachings. So then it talks about not taking refuge in spirits, as that's not a big thing in the West, I guess. We don't talk that much about spirits, even though they exist. But and also non-Buddhists, like here they're talking about Hindu or other, practitioners of other Indian religions, where they take refuge in Brahma, Indra, Shiva, Rudra, Ganesha, and so on. So Pavanga Rinpoche says that's better than taking refuge in spirits, but they're still in samsara. These are samsaric gods, and since they're subject to death and rebirth, and they don't really have insight into the nature of reality, then they're not worthy objects of refuge. But the Buddha, the teacher of Buddhism, is not like these. Another text called Praise to the Praiseworthy says, "You proclaimed, I am friend to you who are without protection. Your great compassion embraces all beings. Teacher, you have great compassion, you have love, you act by your love. You are diligent, you are not lazy. Who else could be like you? You are the protector of all sentient beings. You're a kind relation to all." So then Pavanga Rinpoche says, "I'll discuss the Buddha's qualities individually in another section, which we're coming to. According to that section, he has three magnificent qualities: omniscience, love, and ability. Sometimes we talk about Buddha's wisdom, compassion, and power. And then when we're talking about Tantra, then those qualities of the enlightened being, the wisdom manifests as Manjushri, the Buddha, or sometimes a bodhisattva of wisdom, love and compassion as Avalokiteshvara, and power or ability as Vajrapani. So they these deities. So by receiving initiation into those deities, by receiving teachings, by receiving the meditation practices, the sadhanas to do with those deities, we can develop those qualities of wisdom, compassion, and power within ourselves through relying on the sort of archetypal manifestation of those qualities as represented by those deities. Not only do spirit kings and so forth not have even a portion of these good qualities, but also the sum of the good qualities of worldly refuges, gods, nagas, and the like, cannot rival even the good qualities of a single Buddhist Shravaka, stream enterer. So in the Hinayana, the hearers, Shravakas, those typical Hinayana practitioners, you see when you see the pictures of the Buddha, paintings of the Buddha, you see his two main Arhat disciples, Shariputra and Madhyayana, standing beside him. So to become one of those Arhats, or the Da Chompa in Tibetan, foe destroyer, sometimes translated as, the foe that's destroyed being the delusions, especially ignorance. There are four stages of practice. There's a stream, and the lowest of those is a stream enterer, one who's entered the stream to become an arhat. So even a stream enterer has more qualities than these other, worldly spirits and worldly gods that some people take refuge in. Buddha is the ultimate refuge because he has taken the two benefits, the benefit for oneself and the benefit for others, to their most developed state. Our teacher has eliminated all faults and possesses all qualities. That's Buddha. Simply put, the ultimate jewel of Buddha is assumed to be the two Dharmakayas, or truth bodies. The relative jewel of Buddha, the two physical kayas, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. So when we're talking about the three jewels of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, there's the ultimate Buddha and the relative Buddha, the ultimate Dharma and the relative Dharma, and the ultimate Sangha and the relative Sangha. So we're just talking about the Buddha today. So we talked about those Buddha bodies before, didn't we? The Dharmakaya, two Dharmakaya bodies, which are the fruit of the accumulation of the merit of wisdom, and the two form bodies, two Rupakayas, which are the fruit of the accumulation of the merit of method. So the Dharmakaya, the wisdom Dharmakaya, the omniscient mind of the Buddha, can only be seen by other Buddhas. So it doesn't help sentient beings that much by existing. So in order to reach sentient beings, and the Buddha has to reach sentient beings, because that's why the Buddha became a Buddha, through the perfection of bodhicitta, the determination to become a Buddha for the sole purpose of enlightening other sentient beings. So once we become a Buddha, we have no choice but then to act, to lead other sentient beings to enlightenment. That's the whole point. So the omniscient mind of the Buddha manifests as a Sambhogakaya, or the enjoyment body. So that exists in a pure land called Akanishta, and is surrounded only by bodhisattvas, and bodhisattvas just on the pure levels, the 8th, 9th, and 10th level bodhisattvas. And it gives only Mahayana teachings, and that Sambhogakaya is adorned with the 32 major and 80 minor marks of the Buddha, and it lasts until the end of samsara. So those are the 5 attributes of the Sambhogakaya. So what about the rest of sentient beings who aren't Arya Bodhisattvas? Then the Buddha manifests as such as Shakyamuni Buddha, as a founder Buddha, and gives teachings. So that's, we call it a Nirmanakaya aspect. So the ability, so that's one of the qualities of Buddha, the ability to manifest in these different ways in order to guide sentient beings. So the way that the Buddhas guide us is, I'm not sure if it says this or not later, but as it says in the teachings, the Buddha doesn't guide us by removing our suffering by hand, like when you pull a thorn out of your flesh, or by washing away our negativities with holy water, or by transplanting his realizations into our minds. If the Buddha could do any of those things, they'd do them. But what the Buddha is up against is our karma. So the force of karma and the force of the power of the Buddha is sort of equal. So it's only when our karma allows an opening for the Buddha to reach us that they can do so. So the way the Buddhas guide us is not by doing those three things, but by showing us the teachings. And then if we have the karma to understand and to follow the teachings, then that door is opened, and every possibility lies before us. So somehow, in our previous lives, our previous perfect human rebirth, even though sometimes it says, like in Lama Tsongkhapa's foundation of the all good qualities, it says this perfect human rebirth is received only once. It's not received only once, because the only way to really receive, to create the cause for a perfect human rebirth that has all these 18 attributes is the only way to create the cause is to create the cause of each of those 18 attributes. And that depends on incredibly intensive practice of Dharma. So the only way to practice Dharma intensively enough to create the 18 causes of these 18 attributes of perfect human rebirth is to have a perfect human rebirth. And that perfect human rebirth that created this one had to be created by a previous one. So there are lots of previous perfect human rebirths. But Lama Tsongkhapa says it's received only once. First of all, to sort of energize us in the way that the teachings of the perfect human rebirth are supposed to do. What he's really saying is that it's so rare, it's so hard to find a perfect human rebirth. They're so few and far between that it's like only receiving it once. It's so long since we had our last one. We've been suffering in the lower realms for so long until finally our number came up and somehow we were thrown into this perfect human rebirth by the karma created by that long distant past perfect human rebirth, that it's as if there's only one. This is the only time. So the best way for us to think about it is to think, this. What's that acronym? YOLO. You only live once. So I don't know what the equivalent would be. You only have a perfect human rebirth once. There's too many letters to make an acronym out of that. But YOPO, you only perfect human rebirth once. So it's best for us to think YOPO and make the most of this opportunity we have. If we do it properly, I've had 50 years now. Can you believe that? Since almost 50 years since I met these teachings, and all I can think of is the lost opportunities to take advantage of this perfect human rebirth. If we do it properly, in fact, our next rebirth may be another perfect human rebirth. If we purify, if we practice sincerely and don't waste much time, if any, we may not be YOPO, we may receive a succession of perfect human rebirths. That's what we want to do. We don't want to go into the lower realms in our next life or ever again. We just want to have a succession of perfect human rebirths, improving our practice life after life after life. And the nature of the mind is such that the more you do something, the better you get at it and the easier it comes. So unfortunately, what we're normally good at is following attachment, and we really perfect following attachment. We have so many perfect things, and and the supermarkets, Lama Yeshe love to use supermarket example, where you have like 100 different kinds of breakfast cereal. And then, with a perfect human rebirth, you can pick out the one that you really like. It's there on the shelf. Maybe you should buy two in case, you can't get when the first one runs out. So, the perfect human rebirth gives us the opportunity to practice Dharma intensely, so that it's not as if it's received only once. But anyway, that's kind of the healthy way to think, that this is the only chance we're going to get to really practice Dharma, and we're we're like an arrow shot at a target. It just keeps going until it hits the target, and the target is death. We don't know how close the target is. So, and there's no stopping, there's no taking a rest. The arrow just inexorably goes towards its target. So that's us rushing towards death. We don't know when it's going to come. Anyway, so the teachings talk about the ultimate and relative Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the ultimate, so the relative jewel of Buddha are these physical kayas. So that's one of the qualities of Buddha, to manifest in this way out of compassion. So the next section is why Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I'm just going to talk about the Buddha, are fitting objects of refuge. And the main reasons are the good qualities of the jewel of the Buddha. So again, we talk about these jewels of refuge. So just as Rinpoche doesn't like using the word scope, the three scopes, he says, the path of the lower, intermediate, the path of the lower, middle, and great, capable being. Just as he doesn't like that. Scope, he doesn't like three jewels. Konchok Sum is the Tibetan, and that's the rare, precious, sublime ones, is how Rinpoche translates what's normally called the three jewels. I think understanding that that's not the perfect translation, I think for shorthand, it's probably okay if we use that term. Kon means precious. Chog means sublime. And Sum means three. So the rare is thrown in as well, because usually things that are rare are precious. Like a perfect human rebirth. So there are four reasons that the Buddha is a perfect object of refuge. The first is the Buddha has freed himself from all dangers. Sorry. First is the Buddha has freed himself from all dangers. People drowning or trapped in quicksand cannot rescue each other. If the Buddhas, the guides in whom we take refuge, had not freed themselves from all dangers, they could not free others. Buddha, our teacher, is liberated from all dangers. So Devadatta was one of the early, I think he was a relative, maybe he was the Buddha's nephew or cousin or something. Devadatta. He was always around the Buddha, but always criticized him. I think Lajen in Tibetan. He once wanted to murder the Buddha and used a mechanical device to hurl rocks at him. I guess it's like those things that people practice tennis with. You know, it spits the tennis balls out. So I guess this Devadatta invented a thing that throws rocks. I think in the medieval times, they had things which, you know, Game of Thrones or something, you know, so they put on top of the castle and hurled rocks or boiling oil at people below. He used a mechanical device to hurl rocks at him, but he could not harm him. So the Buddha had this kind of invisible shield or something around him. In Rajagriha, Rajagriha is where Buddha did the second turning of the wheel on Vulture's Peak, taught perfection of wisdom. Ajatashatru let loose a mad, untamed elephant. All the other arhats were terrified and flew into the sky, but the Buddha was not afraid and subdued the elephant. Then another householder named Sri Gupta devised a plan to throw Buddha into a pit of fire, but the Buddha did not come past. Sri Gupta poisoned Buddha's food, but this did not succeed either. So all these people who were against the Buddha tried to harm him, were unable to, because, you know, to be harmed, the Buddha had to have the cause to be harmed, and he had purified all negative karma. So no matter what anybody tried, the Buddha couldn't be harmed. And as he was free from receiving harm, for that reason, he's a perfect object of refuge. So then Pabonka, I guess, he told that story at length, and then he continued. Sri Gupta, his wife, and the rest regarded our teacher as a mere ordinary being that could be intimidated by fiery pits or poison. One can readily compare this with the section on devotion to one's spiritual guide that tells how one cannot be sure of appearances. So what he's referring to there is, you know, one of the teachings on guru devotion, and guru devotion means seeing that our guru is actually a Buddha, is a Buddha, not an ordinary person. And one of the reasons for being able to regard our guru as a Buddha is that what we see isn't the way it exists. Did I mention before, I saw this, I saw His Holiness was saying the first thing he tries to remember when he wakes up in the morning is that things do not exist as they appear. So, you know, one of our main problems is believing that things exist as we see them. I'm looking at all the objects around me, thinking they really exist from their own side. They're real, they're solid. The way I see them is truly the way they exist. So when we see our teacher as an ordinary human being, that's a mistaken perception. And that's a failure of our practice of guru devotion. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's root guru was His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, the junior tutor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And sometimes when I was with them, and they used to go and see their teachers, His Holiness or Ling Rinpoche or Trijang Rinpoche, sometimes they'd let me tag along. And one time we went to see His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche. And if you see pictures of him, this was in the late 70s. He passed away in 81. So we went to see him. I'm not sure, it might have been 1979 or 80, and he was looking very thin and quite frail at that time. And, you know, like he was this old man sitting on his bed, and you know, the lamas sat down there and I sat in the back, and then they talked in Tibetan, blah, 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 you know, I didn't understand. And so Trijang Rinpoche, you know, he was the one who edited this teaching of Rinpoche's. And then we came out, Lama turned to me very sternly and said, "Did you saw Haruka? Did you saw Haruka?" And I was like, I just saw this old monk Lama, and he pretended to be very disappointed in me. I don't think he had any expectations of me at all, to see the Guru as a deity. But, you know, that's presumably how he and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, they were talking to Haruka, Chakrasamvara, you know, with, you know, all these 8 or 12 arms and all these different legs and different heads. I mean, you know, they're different aspects. I don't know what aspect they saw. Because you can also see a 2-arm, one face and 2 arms, Haruka, to keep it simple, I guess. So maybe they just saw Haruka manifesting with 1 head and 2 arms, and I have no idea. I saw this old man, but things do not exist as they appear. So these people saw the Buddha as an ordinary person. They didn't see him as an enlightened being with, you know, 32 major and 80 minor marks and all that. So this indicates that the Buddha has freed himself from all danger because he's abandoned the 2 types of obscuration together with their karmic instincts. So, as we mentioned before, you know, the Buddha has freed himself from gross and subtle obscurations that obscure the clear light nature of mind. And that's why we aren't enlightened. We have the potential to become enlightened by removing the gross and subtle obscurations, as the Buddha did, but we haven't done that yet. So whatever we see is through these veils of ignorance. So that's why we don't see things as they exist. So the Buddha has freed himself from danger because he's freed himself from those obscurations. There's one reason why he's a perfect guide. So he's done that so he can show us how to do it. And that's how the Buddha guide us. Buddhas guide us by, you know, not removing our sufferings by hand, etc., but by showing us the path. And then if we have the karma, if we have this perfect human rebirth, or not even a perfect human rebirth, but some connection with the Dharma, we can follow to the best of our ability. And that's the Buddha guiding us. So that's one thing a Buddha does. And the second reason the Buddha is a perfect guide is because he's skilled in the means of freeing others from danger. If he were freed from all personal danger, but not skilled enough to know how to protect others, he'd be as unable to protect others as a mother with amputated arms is to save her drowning child. It's an interesting example. But the Bhagawan, the Buddha, is skilled. The Bhagawan is Tathagata. Not Tathagata. Bhagawan is What's the Tibetan for Bhagawan? Okay. The Buddha is skilled in the means of subduing his disciples. He liberated such great sinners as Angulimala, who was consumed by feelings of hostility. So Angulimala was the one his false guru had told him that he'd attain liberation by cutting the thumbs off 1,000 people and making a rosary of thumbs. So he'd killed 999 people. And then the 1,000th, he saw the Buddha. So he thought the Buddha would be the 1,000th thumb. But somehow he couldn't catch the Buddha. But by that connection, the Buddha was able to show him the error of his ways, and he was able to purify and actually became an arhat, even though he'd killed 999 people. So, I mean, I know I have to kill someone to get their thumb, but anyway, it's the story. So, so the Buddha was able to do that. So, we haven't killed or harvested 999 thumbs. So it should be easier for the Buddha to guide us when we don't have that amount of negativity. Although, in previous lives, we've done all these negative things. We've been Hitler, we've been Stalin, we've been Mao, we've been Putin, we've been all of these greatly negative people in previous lives. There's nothing that we haven't done since beginning of this time, and not just once, but countless times. There's no beginning to creating negative karma. Then this other one, Pramudita, the king of celestial musicians, or Uruvila Kashyapa, who were consumed with pride. So they had certain worldly abilities, and they were filled with pride with their abilities, and the Buddha destroyed their pride. And anyway, there's powerful creatures such as yakshas and people with dull faculties, as Chudapantaka. Remember the story of the small path? Anyway, we don't have time now. So all these people who were old and had few root merits, as the householder Sri Jata. So this was the old monk. We talked about him last time, I think, who he wanted, the old man who wanted to become a monk, and Madhyayana was the keeper of the monastery and wouldn't let him in. He didn't have the karma to become a monk, but then he was wailing and gnashing his teeth, and the Buddha came along and said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I want to become a monk," but they said, "I don't have the karma." So then the Buddha, with his incredible powers of being able to see distant and tiny karmas and so on, saw that in a distant life he'd been a fly on a piece of cow dung that had floated on a gutter around a stupa, and that done passive circumambulation. Because of the power of the object, that was enough karma for him to become a monk. Remember that story? There's a whole long story about Sri Jata. And people with great lust, such as Nanda. So that's how skilled the Buddha was in the means of subduing disciples. So not only has he freed himself from fears, he can free us from fears, as given by all these almost impossible people that the Buddha was able to actually lead to liberation. So we can have full confidence that he'd be able to help us, who aren't as negative as these people. The third reason is that Buddha reacts compassionately to all without feelings of intimacy or distance. If he did not do this, he would help only those who are dear to him and not his enemies. So, we feel compassion for those who are close to us, and for those who are different or unconnected, we don't have any compassion for them. So now we're seeing that illustrated in Ukraine. You know, all these people fleeing into Poland and Romania and Moldova, these neighboring countries. So all the white ones they're letting in, but then the black Ukrainians of color, they're sort of not letting in. So that's the Buddha. If the Buddhas were on the border, they wouldn't do that. They would have compassion equally for all. So, but this shows where the racist tendencies come from. So Buddha is not like that, helping those to whom he relates and not those who are different. There was no difference in the help he gave and the intimacy he felt towards Devadatta, the sworn enemy, or Rahula, his own son. Devadatta ate a vast amount of medicinal butter in order to compete with a similar feat of the Buddhas. So that was like a Nathan's hot dog contest back in the Buddha's time. The Buddha ate a huge amount of butter and Devadatta tried to compete with him. I'm not very familiar with that story, but he could not digest it and became very sick. So the Buddha, our teacher, freed Devadatta from the illness by swearing that he loved Devadatta and Rahula, his son, equally. Shakyamuni Buddha was the Buddha who came to our present world system. But if we were to compare, we would see that other Buddhas share the same qualities. So, he doesn't hold some close and others distant. He has equal compassion for all sentient beings. So that's another quality of the Buddha. And then the fourth reason is that the Buddha works for the sake of all others, whether they've helped him or not. So we do not do this. When we gain a little power or wealth, we do not judge the downtrodden worthy enough to hold a conversation with them or say a few kind words to them, let alone help them. So we feel very superior. We work for the sake of people who have helped us and not for people who have not. So we do not protect the downtrodden. Buddha is not like this. He works for the sake of everyone, whether they've helped him or not. Buddha nurses the sick. For example, he once nursed and washed the body of a monk who was so ill that his body was covered in his own feces and urine. He looked after people like the ugly Brahmin who had the 18 signs of ugliness. I'm not sure what they are. And was an outcast even among beggars. I used to love these lists. Buddhism has amazing numerical lists. The 2 of this, the 3 of that, the 4 of those, the 5 of these, 6 of the other. I mean, there's an incredible number of lists. In fact, there's a book we published years ago by His Holiness Dujum Rinpoche, the head of the Nyingma tradition. In fact, I think I saw his incarnation, Dujum Rinpoche's incarnation, just passed away. He was in his 20s or in his 30s, I think. Dujum Rinpoche passed away in the late 80s, I think it was 87 or 88. Then his incarnation was recognized. And he just passed away at a relatively young age. So Dujum Rinpoche wrote this book called The History and Fundamentals of the Nyingma tradition. And that was translated by a couple of scholars, Matthew Kapstein, who I think was in Chicago at the university. I think he might have retired now, Matthew, and Gyume Dorji, a Scottish practitioner who passed away a few years ago. So they translated this major work by His Holiness Dujum Rinpoche, History and Fundamentals of the Nyingma tradition. And they wanted to publish it with Oxford University Press. But His Holiness Dujum Rinpoche said they should give it to little-known wisdom publications. So we published that book. And in the back, there's 2 volumes, and the second volume is all end notes and all kinds of stuff. And there's a huge glossary of numerical lists in the back. And in fact, I asked Yume if we could publish that on our website. And he gave permission, but then Wisdom didn't have it in a file that was easily shareable for some reason. Either that or they didn't want to do it. So I wanted to put it on the archive website because it's so interesting to see all these lists. But I don't know if there's a list of 18 signs of ugliness. I'll have to look it up. The Buddha protected and looked after people who were ugly, such as King Prasenajit's daughter Vajri, who was deformed and had a face like a pig, or the householder Bodhi's son, Svagata, who had such a small amount of merit that his family gradually lost all its wealth after he was born. So Svagata became a beggar, but whatever group of beggars he joined never got any food. This guy was really cursed. So he was renamed. So Svagata means welcome. So he was renamed Duragata, as unwelcome. Wherever he went, no one gave anything away. So he became an outcast, even among the beggars. So even when he went on pilgrimage, he was not allowed to return. That's so then Pabonka Rinpoche. So there's, there are a lot of teachings left out of this book. Not a lot, but there are certain parts that I guess Trichin Rinpoche thought were sort of asides, so would make the text too long. But he noted where the bits were left out. So it says here, Kyabji Pabonka Rinpoche spoke in greater detail on how the Buddha offered his protection and cared for these most unfortunate. Thus, the Buddha has great compassion for all and has no feelings of intimacy or distance. Furthermore, he works for the sake of all, whether they've helped him or not. But he loves pathetic wretches especially. So we're in luck there, being pathetic wretches. If he were not loving and did not have great compassion, he might not offer his protection even when sought. But the Buddha has these qualities, and they say he definitely offers protection even when it's not sought. So another example that's often given is that if the Buddha is sitting here and one person were there kind of caressing his arm and someone was on the other side hacking pieces off his other arm with a sharp knife, he would feel equal love and compassion and be willing to help both those people equally. So that's his incredible equanimity. So those are 4 of the qualities of the Buddha that allow him to be the perfect refuge. So that's part of what a Buddha is. Then the next section is the measure of having taken refuge. And the first section of that is taking refuge by knowing the good qualities of one's refuge. One must take refuge by knowing the qualities of each of the 3 jewels. So this has 3 parts. The good qualities of the Buddha, the good qualities of the Dharma, good qualities of the Sangha. So we're just going to, since we're talking about what is a Buddha, we're just going to look at the, and anyway, the Dharma and the Sangha come from the Buddha. But good qualities of the Buddha, what we'll look at. So the Buddha has 4 types of good qualities: the good qualities of his body, of his speech, of his mind, and of his good works. So the good qualities of the Buddha's body, the ornament of realization, the ornament to realize, that's the Abhisamaya Lankara of Maitreya Sangha, says his hands and feet are marked by wheels, his tortoise feet. In other words, anyway, he's talking about 32 major marks. The same text also speaks of the sage's copper-colored nails. So that is, he is also adorned by 80 marks. So the signs and marks. So we can't see these signs and marks, but those of higher perception can. The signs signify that he has the mind stream of a great personage. The marks indicate the sort of qualities he has inside. It is very powerful to think about the natural qualities of the marks and signs, the good qualities of their causes and so forth. Nagarjuna's precious garland tells us that if one added up all the merits in the world of the Pratyeka Buddhas, the solitary realizers, the learner and no more learner Shravakas, the hearers that I mentioned before, the world emperors, Chakravartins, and so on, all this merit would produce a single pore on the body of a Buddha. All the merit needed to produce all the pores of a Buddha multiplied by 100 would produce one of the marks. All the merit needed to produce all 80 of the marks multiplied by 100 would produce one of these noble signs. The merit needed to produce 30 of these signs multiplied by 1,000 would produce the urna, the hair curl. So we see, when you see the Buddha, you see this dark blue thing in his mark in his forehead. That's a hair curl. There's a hair curl there that you can pull at the extent, and I think at arm's length. I'm not sure what it does, but it's one of the 32 signs of the Buddha. So this is just enumerating the incredible amount of merit to produce these marks and signs. The merit to produce this last sign multiplied by 100,000 would produce the Ushnisha, the crown protuberance that we see on the Buddha. The merit to produce this multiplied by a quadrillion produces the Brahma voice of a Buddha. Further, every part of a Tathagata's body, the signs and marks, is a teacher of the Dharma, and so performs the deeds of enlightened speech. Even his Ushnisha, his pores, etc., perform the deeds of the enlightened mind, and so perceive the relative and ultimate aspects of all knowable objects. So every atom of the Buddha's body has the qualities of the body, speech, and mind of the whole of the Buddha. According to the tradition of past Lamrim lineage gurus, there are 3 lines of verse from Tsongkhapa's Songs of Experience. So that's the shorter of the 3 main Lamrim texts of Lama Tsongkhapa. Songs of Experience, or Lines of Experience, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls them hymns of experience, each relating to the qualities of enlightened body, speech, and mind, respectively. So I think we see something similar in the Guru Puja. Body, born of 10 million virtues and excellences, speech that fulfills the hopes of infinite beings, mind that sees all knowables as they are. I pay homage to the head of the Shakya tribe, the Shakyamuni. This is why the enlightened body pervades all knowables. Whatever is pervaded by his body is also pervaded by his speech and mind. Hence, all Buddha fields appear in his body, and his body pervades all Buddha fields. These are the inconceivable mysteries of the enlightened body. A sutra tells us, whatever their primal wisdom pervades, so too does their bodies pervade. Usually when one sees the famous Ushnisha on the Buddha's head, it's only 4 inches high. You know, when you see statues and so on, I guess it depends on the size of the statue. When a statue's life size, I think it's 4 inches high. When it was measured by the Bodhisattva Vegadharan, he rose upwards to immeasurable world systems through his miraculous powers, yet still he failed to see the top of the Tathagata's crown protrusion, and he was too weary to complete the measurement. So he went infinitely into space through world systems and still couldn't see the top of the Buddha's Ushnisha. This is told in the Sutra on the Inconceivable Mysteries. A Buddha's clothes maintain a distance of 4 inches from his body. Yet when seen externally, they follow the shape of his body. So when Rinpoche was teaching us the Buddha Shakyamuni meditation, when we were doing the visualization, he would say that he's wearing the robes of a monk, but they don't touch his body. They're separated from it by a distance. I thought he said of an inch. Here it says 4 inches, because of the power of his realizations. So I think Venerable Dondrup's robes are about 1/2 inch from his body. So he's got 3.5 inches to go. So his feet do not touch the ground, yet they leave the outlines of wheels as footprints. Earthworms under his feet have great bliss for 7 days. And when they leave their animal state, they are reborn in the celestial realms. From the praise in similes, your body is adorned by the signs, so beautiful, it is nectar for the eyes, like a cloudless autumn sky adorned with constellations. Sage, you are a golden color and beautifully draped in robes, like the peak of a golden mountain rising above a bank of clouds. You, protector, are not adorned with jewels. Your mandala face is full of luster. Not even the full mandala, cloudless moon, can equal it. Your lotus face is a lotus opened by the sun. Disciples like bees see the lotus and unhesitatingly fly to it. Your golden colored face is beautiful with white teeth, like a golden mountain range bathed in pure autumn moonlight. O one worthy of our offerings, your right hand is made beautiful by the sign of the wheel. It gives encouragement to people frightened of samsara's wheel. Sage, when you walk, your 2 feet are like glorious lotuses. They leave outlines on the ground. O lotus one, how beautiful you are. I think when we say the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, he stepped out 7 signs and said, I am supreme in this world, in the praise of the Buddha. I think it's when he was born, he immediately took 7 steps in each of the 4 cardinal directions, and where he stepped on the ground, lotuses sprung up. Is there something like that? Remember these qualities, Kabompa Rinpoche says. If you need more detail on this section, you'll have to consult the discussion in an ornament to realization, the Abhisamalankara, and other texts. So those are the good qualities of Buddha's holy body. Is it lunch break time?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. So let's dedicate the merit of this morning's session because of this merit we've created by generating bodhicitta and discussing the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. Because of this merit, may I quickly reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So just very briefly, we can dedicate like that. And I'll see you in an hour and a half.